It's the Wednesday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast, and that means we're going to get you ready for the Steelers' final preseason game and the best angles to look at it. To do that, I got the help of Gerry Dulac leading off the show as we talk about the Steelers rookies and a lot of other things, and we'll finish off the show with Brian Batko, all here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Gerry Dulac, one of our esteemed Steelers beat writers here with us, joining on the show to start things off. Remember, this show is sponsored by Mike's Beer Bar, the best place to go to for beer in all of Pittsburgh. You can find them in the North Shore, right across the street from PNC Park. Whether you're in for a Steelers, Pirates, or Pitt game, Mike's Beer Bar is right across the street from PNC Park and gives you the best selection of beer in town with over 500 available beers, 300 of them being local beers and 80 of those being local craft beers on tap. Check out Mike's Beer Bar for that. We'll have more on them later. Gerry, wanted to talk to you about where things stand going into the final preseason game with the Steelers rookies, because there was a lot of talk about talking points going into training camp and the preseason about Broderick Jones, where he'd be with Dan Moore Jr. But I want to start with you about Joey Porter Jr. because we previewed him before the last preseason game. You talked about his importance, and he delivered with a big interception, a solid display of play. And Mike Tomlin talked about the willingness of putting Patrick Peterson in the slot in the defense, which seemingly would open the door for more opportunities for Joey Porter Jr. to play. How close do you think Joey Porter Jr. is to being a serious part of the Steelers cornerback rotation going into week one?
Well, Chris, I don't think there's any question their plan is to have him play on the outside. And I don't think there's any question they are best equipped to have him playing on the outside. I don't think they want Patrick Peterson out there. I know they don't. They would prefer Patrick Peterson inside. They want to use Patrick Peterson as a nickel. They want to use Patrick Peterson as a dime. They want to use him maybe as a little bit of a safety in some of their sub packages. They don't want him out on the outside unless there's a special defense they're trying to play some type of zone. But Joey Porter Jr. gives them the best option outside. And we heard Mike Tomlin say the other day that they want to put, because Joey Porter didn't play in the first game, the first preseason game, they want to put him, according to Mike Tomlin, in some situations and environments to get him more prepared to play, which means they want to get him prepared to be their starting corner. And I expect him, if not by week one, certainly by week two. The game's at home. It's against the 49ers, we know. It's probably better starting him at home than on the road in his very first game. But there is no question whatsoever that their plan is to have Joey Porter be their starting outside corner.
So if Joey Porter Jr. is the outside guy, Levi Wallace outside, and Patrick Peterson on the inside, would that limit the opportunities for guys like Chandon Sullivan and Elijah Riley to be slot corners on this team? Because that is a necessary role.
Well, you know, Chris, they play so much sub-package football that Patrick Peterson's going to be on the field, not all the time, not at age 33, but he's going to be on the field. But I don't know that he's going to play that nickel, that slot corner, a whole lot in press coverage. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen a lot, but they have a lot of different roles for him. And I don't know how much, that's what they're going to find out. They're going to find out in the regular season who can do what. It looks nice in the preseason, but let's face it, Chandon Sullivan and Elijah Riley, for the most part, are playing the other team's second and third teamers. So until they go against frontliners and the Steelers find out what works, they're going to kind of experiment with that a little. But they'll put Patrick Peterson on the field quite a bit. But just like with the other guys, they're going to find out what works for him and what doesn't work for him. They want to make sure at age 33, he still has something left in the tank. Do they think he does? Yeah. Does he think he does? Yeah. But you know what? The regular season is going to tell us. Preseason isn't telling us anything, nor is it going to.
No, I agree with that. Let's flip to the first round pick real quick here. Broderick Jones had more chances to play in the second preseason game again, but he gave up a sack. Didn't look all that terrible, but you could tell he still had room to grow. Meanwhile, Dan Moore Jr. looked like a starting left tackle. Jerry, where do you see this battle being? A lot of people had this pegged as something that either Broderick would take by week 1 or at least by like week 4, 5, or 6, some going into the midseason. Is Dan Moore in a position where he might solidify himself as the starter for this year?
Chris, it's going to be very interesting to see what they do with Broderick Jones. He is not ready to play. I was talking to the coaches today about him. They really like the progress he's making. They know he's going to be a really good left tackle in this league, but he's not ready to be that now. And the intriguing part about all this is you talking about a guy, Dan Moore, who's in his third year. He started at left tackle, the most important position on the offensive line since the first game of his rookie season. He's never missed a game. He's reliable. He's solid. Yeah. Does he make some mistakes? Yeah. So does every young left tackle short of Anthony Munoz or Tony Vaselli. So that's going to happen. But he's not a swinging gate out there. And am I calling him a Pro Bowl tackle? No. But he's more than solid when you think of what he has done in only his third year in the league. And they are not ready to move Dan Moore Jr. out of that spot. He's been very good. We saw him throw a big block the other day on Jaylen Warren's 62-yard touchdown, but then that whole play was executed and blocked to perfection. They couldn't draw it up any better on the chalkboard. So I don't see Broderick Jones moving in as the starter anytime soon unless there's an injury. But as I like to say, Chris, they didn't bring him in to lead the band at halftime. Broderick Jones is going to play, and they're going to work him into that lineup in some form because they don't just want him sitting on the bench as long as Dan Moore is playing well.
Absolutely. I want to flip to another Georgia guy, and that's going to be Darnell Washington. Now, he got in the game and drew 2 pass interferences in the end zone, as we saw when Mitch Trubisky was quarterbacking. Do you feel Darnell Washington has done enough to justify maybe being a part of a tight end rotation with the starters, or is he still a guy that you see as a reserve guy who will just come onto the field rarely whenever they need to give Freiermuth and Gentry a blow?
Yeah, I think it's more the former than the latter, Chris. I will say I thought one of those pass interferences, and I think the first one was actually offensive pass interference. I thought he grabbed the guy more than he was interfered with. But all that being said, yeah, I think they feel like they want to get Darnell Washington involved in that offense on the field. When Bruce Arians was the offensive coordinator, they used 3 tight ends a lot. They have not done that since, really. So that presents a lot of options. When you have a guy like Darnell Washington, who's such a good blocker, but is athletic enough, and we have seen it, he's skilled enough to catch the ball and run after the catch. He's an intriguing option there. And I would love to see them use some 3 tight end sets, a lot more of it, to utilize some of his ability. But I definitely think he's going to be part of some type of rotation or packages that they want to use.
I want to talk to Jerry more about how the run game is working for the Steelers. He wrote a very interesting piece about an aspect of the run game that is helping things out. We'll discuss that on the other side of this break here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But before we do that, I want to remind you this show is sponsored by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. Go to the North Shore right across the street from PNC Parking. You can find Mike's Beer Bar where they have over 20 televisions so you can catch all your NFL games, your college football games, Pirates, Penguins, Riverhounds, Premier League, anything sports you can watch right at Mike's. When you go on in there, they have 500 different available beers at all times, 300 of them being local beers, and 80 of those local beers being craft beers that you can get right out the tap, available into a cold glass. And you can try out their flights right now, where you can check out all the different options all in one sitting. And trust me, you'll never run out of options because Mike's gives you so many to cycle through. Try their steak on a stone for an awesome meal where you could choose how hot you want your steak cooked right in front of you and on a heated stone as you enjoy a night out in Pittsburgh. Come to Mike's Beer Bar and get your sports fix and experience the best bar in Pittsburgh, and tell them Chris sent you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter, Gerry Dulac. We're going to keep rolling here. Gerry, you wrote a piece that I thought was very interesting in a specific dynamic of the run game. And you talked about receivers focusing on their blocking downfield. And one thing that Najee Harris noticed, that Jaylen Warren, everyone noticed and talked about, was everyone on the offensive line did a great job blocking on Jaylen Warren's touchdown. But you saw Deontay Johnson, he didn't flat anybody, but he did his job, walled off his man. So all Jaylen Warren had to worry about was the safety at the end of the run, and that was a big thing. What did you get from your piece when you were looking at how they've emphasized to make that an improved part of their game?
Well, the first thing about all that, when you go back and watch that play, as I just referenced a little bit earlier, you cannot draw it up any better. You cannot get four linemen executing blocks any better. The center, Mason Cole, the right guard, James Daniel, getting into the second level. Jaylen Warren cutting between Dan Moore and Isaac Seumalo. But it was the block downfield by Deontay Johnson. And yeah, he didn't pull a Hines Ward there and flatten the guy, but he got in his way. He blocked well enough. He knew how to block him, or at least get in his way. And Jaylen Warren used that block to score in that 62-yard run. What I found interesting about all that is, Matt Canada talked about this the other day. Deontay Johnson was telling me today that it's been a point of emphasis. And I even had a chance to talk to George Pickens after practice about blocking. You wouldn't think they would ask a Mercedes to act like a Ford 150, but they would like George Pickens to do that. And George Pickens said he likes doing that. He said he actually did that at Georgia. Now, I'd have to go back and watch their game film, but I'll take him at his word. But that's something that the Steelers want to do. And the reason why I was shocked to find this out, I knew they only had 8 runs of 20-plus yards last year. Eighth fewest. I think they had 10, eighth fewest in the league. They had 0 runs of 40-plus yards. They haven't had a run of 40 yards or longer since the 2020 season. And
Wow.
If you want to have an explosive offense, you got to have explosive run plays, not just pass plays. Now, I grant you, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren aren't known as game breakers. They are not the types of backs that are going to hit those types of home runs. But they feel if they start to get some of that downfield blocking, or I don't want to say start to, but if they're guys, if they can get away with some of that, get guys to the second level and get blocks downfield, that's going to lead itself to certainly a whole lot more 20-yard runs. Maybe not a whole lot of 40-yard runs, maybe, but when you haven't had a 40-plus yard run since 2020, that's probably not a good sign. The only thing I didn't go check, but I'd be willing to bet they're the only team in the league that hasn't had a run of at least 40 yards since 2020. I bet they're the only team in the league that doesn't have one.
It's crazy to think about that. Also, George Pickens did used to just get dudes out of the club in college. I saw a couple clips of him in Georgia where he would just bully people when he wanted to, but it wasn't consistent enough. And I think that's what the Steelers want to coach into him and the entire receiving corps, is that on every play. And Najee Harris, when we spoke to him, you were there as well, he was crediting, and it was funny at one point, Cody White, who's no longer in the team, but he was like, "Hey, Cody, I did give you a shout out for your blocking," because it has been an emphasis, and we've seen the impact there. But I think across the board, along with the wide receivers, it's been very interesting to see that kind of switch that we've seen in the run game, because to coincide with Najee Harris coming onto the team in 2021, we also saw just the dropping of the offensive line. Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, Ramon Foster, all those guys, they were gone, and the Steelers had to revamp their offensive line. It's taken them time, and I think we're starting to see the results of that, on top of seeing the receivers block downfield. Gerry, do you think that the Steelers are getting back to being a team that can depend on the run because of the guys that they have that are willing to block?
Yeah, I think that's their mindset. Now, we are going to see if they do that, but we saw great improvement in their run game last year. Look what they did in the second half of the season. They ended up averaging 146 yards per game. Najee Harris's average went from 3.3 before the bye to 4.1 after the bye. I think we're seeing that. And, of course, all the attention that they paid in the offseason to improving the offensive line. I think 2 big things. Isaac Seumalo is a great addition. Obviously, going to be much better than Kevin Dotson, and not to throw stones at him, but he's just not that type of player like Seumalo. And also, James Daniels is really playing like what they expected. We saw him get better as the season went on, But when you look at the way James Daniels played at this time last year and the way he's playing this year at this time, it is night and day. And when you look at those two guards and you put them around Mason Cole, who is very underrated and very solid, that interior of that line is pretty darn good. And I think, they are able to rely on those guys to, have a solid running game and depend on it more so than we have seen. Although, again, we saw it in the second half last year, but more so than we've seen the last number of years for sure.
Absolutely. He's Gerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Don't go anywhere. We still have to talk with Brian Batko as we do another one of our preseason fantasy rounds. But before we do any of that, I want to remind you guys that this show is sponsored by Savinas, Kane & Gallucci, mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them now for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane & Gallucci. We're also sponsored by GameTime.go, where buying your tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy events, and theater near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets, and they have a best price guarantee that can't be beat, so you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're about to have. Download the Game Time app right to your phone, and they'll get you exclusive flash deals on tickets for football games, basketball games, baseball games, concerts, comedy, theater events, everything near you. Game Time will help you get into. And the Game Time best price guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. And if you find tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, create an account, and use code PITTPIT for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code PIT for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter, Brian Batko now subbing in for Gerry Dulac so we can finish our series of fantasy football in the Steelers preseason. Brian won the last one, 35-25. I won the one before that, 37-32. So now here we are, game 3 in the same format. We're going to have a little fun here. Got a quarterback, a running back, 2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and 2 defensive players that we have to select and to get the most fantasy points on Thursday Night Football as the Steelers take on the Falcons in Atlanta. Brian, I guess let's just ask you, how did you win the last one? Go talk about your strategy.
Well, obviously, Chris, I knew that Jaylen Warren was going to pop off the longest run that the Steelers have had since we were all wearing masks and sanitizing our hands every 2 seconds back in 2020. So, no, I mean, that was a very fortuitous play for me, as was Mitch Trubisky to Connor Hayward. You and I were sweating out that 7 shots scenario. I know you really wanted Anthony McFarland to run that John in.
It's so close. So close.
Yeah, you almost had the Calvin Austin punt return as well, but he got tripped up at the end. So it was a good battle. I mean, I'm going to point out that I'm up by 5 on aggregate scoring, but that doesn't matter now. We go to the rubber match on a neutral floor.
There we go. A rubber match right here.
Neutral field, I should say.
All right, we're gonna do the same thing with Zeb. I got a coin right here. Call it in the air, and then we'll go from there.
Tails.
Heads. Ha! You finally lost one. You finally lost a coin toss. Now I get to choose. I go second, so you have to go first.
All right, I've got the first pick. Look, I'm going to take a guy who, all he does is throw darts in the preseason, rack up yardage, touchdowns in August. Mason Rudolph will be my quarterback here, and this could backfire for sure. This could be a situation where the Steelers know what they have in him in year, 6 now for Rudolph? Year 6.
19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Yeah, year 6. That's crazy.
So, I mean, it's only his fifth preseason. But, we could get a heavy dose of Tanner Morgan. We could see more Kenny Pickett. We could see more Mitch Trubisky. But I feel like the preseason finale is where Mason Rudolph shines.
Well, thank you for taking him, because now I'll go and address other important positions.
I want to build around my quarterback.
There we go. You build around your quarterback. I'm going to go get Calvin Austin. I'm going to add him to my regime here because I still think his big playability is huge here. And now here's the question: which one do I want to go with? I'm going to go get Darnell Washington again.
Okay.
He hasn't scored for me yet, but I feel like he's due. Like, I mean, they tried to give him 2 touchdowns, in the red zone before Connor Hayward caught that one. So there we go. Austin and Washington, my top tight end and receiver, are off the board. What you got next?
Well, I am going to go with Connor Hayward. I will give you a quick factoid, nugget, whatever you want to say. Last 2 times Connor Hayward has played in this building, the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, he's caught a touchdown pass.
That's a good point.
Last season against the Falcons.
And the
his
Peach
first
Bowl.
NFL touchdown catch. And yes, you're right, Chris, the Peach Bowl.
I was covering that one.
Against the Pitt Panthers from Michigan State. So, he knows those end zones very well. I will take him as my top tight end. And I'm also going to go running back too off the board. So again, I've sort of thrown strategy out the window a little bit here by picking a QB and a running back early, because now you don't have to worry about those positions. But I want Anthony McFarland on my squad. I think he's going to be the guy who gets the most run here. Otherwise, you might end up choosing between some of the no names in the backfield during what could become a garbage time affair on Thursday night.
It could. It's funny. Whoever's had Anthony McFarland has lost so far each week.
That's a good point. But I'm just worried about Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Like, I don't know if either one of those guys are going to get many carries. So, I'll leave it to you to choose between the Greg Bells and Xavier Invalides of the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so I get 2 picks here. You picked your running back and your quarterback, so I can leave those guys out. I'm gonna go
I've got like the 3rd string squad. I've got the 3rd string QB, the 3rd string running back, and I would probably argue the 3rd string tight end at this point in Connor Hayward.
I'm gonna go with. Let's go get Nick Herbig. Because he continues to be
on the top of my board of defenders. He's a cheat code.
He is a cheat code. That man just gets sacks. Now, what do I do here? Ooh, do I double up on defense and take that all the way, or do I close out one of the other positions? Because I could. Let's do this. I'm gonna go get Gunnar Olszewski.
I'm gonna take him as well.
Yes, sir. I'm trying to see into what your strategy is, Batko.
Okay, so it does me no good at this point to take a receiver because
Correct.
You've got 2.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go defensive side of the ball for these 2 picks.
Because that's smart.
Yeah, I mean, it really just makes sense because I get my picks here before you can choose another. I will take Joey Porter Jr.
Nice.
Hopefully for me, we get another pick. It sounded like Mike Tomlin wants to see a lot of him out there in this game because he missed the preseason opener. And I will take a guy who was on your squad last week, Isaiah Loudermilk. Go get me a sack,
nice.
Big Milk. Go take down Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke in this game, please.
That's a good pick. All right, so I don't got to worry about defense. So that means the position I really have to worry about here is tight end. So I have to choose someone before you can choose someone. Picking Pat Freiermuth really worked for me last week, but I don't know how much they use him this week. But I also don't know how much they actually would throw the ball to Gentry. So I'm going to take Pat Freiermuth again. He may not play in this one, but I'm going to just take the chance that he gets another kind of deep ball from Kenny Pickett in this situation and get some big points.
All right. So I might as well just take my 2 receivers then at this point.
Yes.
The first one, I will go Deontay Johnson.
Did I take 2 players there?
What's that, Chris?
Did I take 2 players there?
Maybe not.
It doesn't matter. I mean, at this point, we've picked all each other's players. Okay, who are your 2 receivers?
We'll figure it out at the end. All right, I'm going with Deontay Johnson. Both Matt Canada and Mike Tomlin this week talked about within the amount of snaps that starters play and what they want to see. They also have certain agendas that they want to accomplish. Just a hunch from me here. Maybe there is an agenda to let Deontay Johnson catch a touchdown pass at some point before the heat death of the universe, and they can potentially accomplish that in a preseason game. Get him off the schneid going into the regular season. So he might only play one drive with the starters, but if he does, I'm gonna bank on him finding the end zone. I'm going at the top of the receiver depth chart for one of my guys. For the other, I'm going to go to the bottom for the most part and take Dez Fitzpatrick again for the second week in a row. So I'm hoping that Deontay Johnson will do the early heavy lifting, and Dez Fitzpatrick will be racking up those junk time receptions and yards.
All right, I have 3 picks left here, so I did miss one. So then here's what we'll do. I'm going to go take for defense. For defense, I'm going to take Cole Holcomb because he's been playing a little bit longer.
Okay.
He can get deflections, tackles, and sacks, so we'll put him in there. And then for running back, this is tough because Anthony McFarland kind of is the go-to guy here.
You're choosing between the bell cows and the longest of long shots to make this roster at this point.
Right. I'm going to go with Jaylen Warren because I almost said Jaylen Warren last week. And then I started to say Jaylen Warren, and then I talked myself out of it. And then if I had picked Jaylen Warren, I would have won last week. So good job, Chris. So we're sticking with Jaylen Warren. I won with whoever's had Jaylen Warren has won each game so far. So I will stick with that trait. And I guess we both just make our final picks. I'm going to take Mitch Trubisky because I don't think that Kenny's going to play that long in this one. I do think he'll play some. Who is your final tight end?
All right, Mr. Irrelevant of the North Shore Drive preseason fantasy challenge between Chris and myself. I'll go with Yak Gentry over Rodney Williams.
Ooh,
I think Zach Gentry gets a chance here to maybe find the end zone. As we've seen, with the format here, not a ton of players, so the scores have been relatively low. One touchdown has essentially been the difference in both games. So I'll go with Gentry and hope he catches one from my guy Mason Rudolph to give me the win here.
Absolutely. All right. So your team is Mason Rudolph, Anthony McFarland, Deontay Johnson, Dez Fitzpatrick, Connor Hayward, Zach Gentry, Joey Porter Jr., and Isaiah Loudermilk. My team is Mitch Trubisky, Jaylen Warren, Calvin Austin, Gunnar Olszewski, Darnell Washington, Pat Freiermuth, Nick Herbig, and Cole Holcomb. Those are the teams that we have picked right here. You can find out who wins by watching Thursday Night Football. We'll reconvene.
One thing we learned, Chris, you don't want the fans to vote for you on Twitter.
Yeah, apparently not. Because the last 2 times, whoever has won the fan vote has lost the actual contest. Shows us that none of us know how fantasy works in the preseason.
It's a complete crapshoot, but that's part of the joy of this for sure.
Exactly. We don't want actual effort be counting for anything here. We want aimless fun awarding our successes. So there we have it. There are our fantasy teams. We hope that you've enjoyed this Wednesday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. Thanks again for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast. And thanks again for Gerry Dulac hopping in here. Remember, you can check out this show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel for all of our episodes, as well as our daily content that comes out from the Post-Gazette in our sports department. We'll be back Friday recapping and talking about the biggest stories of the Steelers Thursday night game against the Falcons in the preseason. We'll see you then right here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For 3 months of digital access to post-gazette.com at 99 cents, click the link below in the description.